This took place when I was just a teenager of 13 years, and this experience is part of why I'm still freaked out by the darkness. Also, because of this, I refuse to enter a basement, a crawl space, or any kind of area that's dark and humid. Before I share what happened to me, I should give you some context. Our mom got remarried to a guy, let's rename him Bob, and they decided to relocate my sibling and I to a whole new state, far from our relatives. Prior to their wedding, Bob assaulted our dad with a blade and our father shot him in return. The weapon was loaded with pellets, so it was more like a shotgun than a regular gun, thankfully. Eventually, they stumbled upon this 2-story dwelling in Virginia, not too far from a state park. They told us they landed a great bargain on it because it was located deep in the woods, far from civilization. At that time, my brother, let's call him Max, and I hadn't gotten a glimpse of it yet since we were staying with our grandma and attending school until they could finish moving. I was reluctant to go because I wasn't fond of the guy our mother had chosen to marry, but as a child, my opinion wasn't really considered. The day we had to leave arrived, and I was furious because, as I've said, I disliked this man. We journeyed 3 hours to reach our new residence, and when we arrived, my brother and I finally saw this incredible house. It was a 2-story building with the basement serving as the ground floor and the rest of the house above. When our mother mentioned it was secluded from everything and everyone, we had no clue that she literally meant it was so isolated we would be dwelling in the middle of nowhere. The house was a 5-mile trek away from the main thoroughfare and was enveloped by a thick forest. The house structure was as follows, and it's essential to remember. The basement occupied the entire ground floor, and it was enormous. It had one entrance with small windows dotted around it. To reach the porch, you had to ascend these large wooden stairs. Directly ahead of you as you climbed the stairs were 2 massive white French doors that led to the main entrance. If you stepped through the front door, you'd land in the dining room. From there, you could either proceed straight to the kitchen, or you could descend a stair to the corridor, which takes you to the only bathroom, the basement door, and the back door. Alternatively, you could turn right into the living room. My mom and Bob's room was located to the side of this area. You could pass through an arch to reach my room, which was on the left, and Max's room was on the right. This house also boasted a porch that extended all around it. Our windows were at eye level if you were standing anywhere on the porch. My brother and I had rooms towards the rear of the house, and when you peered out of our windows, all you could spot was the forest. My first strange occurrence there happened around a month after we settled in. Everyone was sleeping, but I was awake playing video games and listening to tunes. I had thick blinds covering my window. Sometime after 1 a.m., I started to feel drowsy, so I switched everything off and settled down in my bed. It was silent, except for the occasional cricket chirping. As I was drifting off, I heard a sound. I opened my eyes, thinking perhaps I had dreamt it. Then I heard it again. It was 3 thumps, like boots stomping on the back porch and pacing back and forth. I was stunned. My heart was pounding like crazy. I was terrified. I was so scared that I couldn't even move. Then the footfall ceased. It halted right outside my window. A minute ticked by. Then I heard something or someone whisper my name. Christina. It sounded like a man, but also not quite. It's tough to describe. It had an unnatural tone, almost like a growl. At this point, I was trembling and had flung my blanket to one side. My door was ajar, and I could see Max sleeping peacefully in his bed. Then whatever it was began tapping on my window, and I bolted to my mom and Bob's room. I hammered on the door and shrieked for them to wake up. My mom and Bob emerged from their room with eyes heavy with sleep, asking me what was wrong. I don't really remember the exact words I used at that time, but I know I was blabbering about someone trying to break into my room. Dave, armed with his flashlight, headed out through the back door to investigate. I stayed back with my mom. He returned after quite a while and said he found no traces of anyone or anything outside, nor any footprints. I was super scared and sleep eluded me that night. The next incident didn't happen to me, but to my younger brother, who was 7 at the time. My mom had insisted he sleep in his own room at night. To make him feel a little less scared, I would always leave my door open. One night, as we all headed to bed, he was almost falling asleep when he heard a noise at his window. The weather was quite hot around August, and our house didn't have air conditioning, so he had his window slightly open with a screen over it to let the air in. On hearing the noise, he looked out, thinking it might be an animal, but to his horror, he saw a man's face with glowing yellow eyes staring back at him. He screamed at the top of his lungs and rushed to wake up Mom and Dave banging on their door. Dave repeated his flashlight investigation but found nothing. After this incident, my brother flatly refused to sleep in his room and started sharing my room. A couple of months passed by, and one day we returned home to find it empty. Our mom and Dave had gone somewhere and were expected to return much later than initially planned. Using my keys, we entered the house. My brother sat down in front of the TV in the living room, and I headed to my room. I noticed the laundry piled up as Mom hadn't gotten around to doing it. I thought I'd help her out by doing it myself. So, I gathered our laundry and headed down to the basement. To get to the basement, you had to switch on the light after opening the door. The staircase leading down was made of wood and there were no railings. The light didn't switch on when I tried, but there was enough sunlight filtering in through the windows for me to see my way down. At the bottom of the stairs, I was able to switch on the light, which filled the entire basement with light. I headed over to the washing machine and started sorting the clothes. As I was engrossed in my task, a stench hit me. It was a combination of rotting meat and smoke, and it was strong enough to make me feel sick. I looked around to find where it was coming from and noticed something in a far corner. I thought it might be a dead animal that might have fallen through the old coal chute that was yet to be blocked off by Dave. I decided to investigate, which was a huge mistake. I saw what looked like a child reaching out his arms. The shock made me fall backwards. The child began crawling towards me and grabbed my pant leg. I was terrified. I screamed and shut my eyes, believing that this was how I would die. Suddenly, I heard my brother calling out from the stairs, "Hey, Chris, you okay?" When I opened my eyes, the only evidence of what just happened was a small handprint on the bottom of my jeans. Without a second thought, I bolted up the stairs, dragging my brother along, and locked the basement door once we reached the top. When our mom and Dave returned home, I narrated the whole incident. But they didn't believe us. They thought we were making up stories because we didn't want to move there in the first place. I was heartbroken that our own mother didn't believe us. From then on, I refused to step foot in the basement and forbade Eric from going there either. One day after we came back from school, our mother told us about a weird incident that happened to her. She was cleaning as usual when she heard a child's laughter. She assumed it was us and was annoyed, thinking we had skipped school. She stepped out of her room into the kitchen and saw a little girl in a blue dress holding a teddy bear. The girl pointed her finger at Mom and said, "It's coming for you," and then vanished. Mom was so frightened that she fled to the barn and stayed there until Dave returned home. She apologized to us for not believing our stories earlier. Not long after this, Mom and Dave got divorced, and we left the house forever. Dave tried to sell the house many times but failed because of its dark history. Apparently, a family lived there in the late 70s. One day, the father lost his mind and shot his wife and one of his 2 daughters. The other daughter hid in the basement while he set the kitchen on fire. She tried to escape through the basement, but the doors were locked, and she couldn't break a window in time. Overcome by the smoke, she fainted and died in the fire. Dave continued to live in the house until he passed away a few years later. Since they couldn't sell it, the house still remains in the family, passed down to his son. I know I'll never return to that place again, and if someone does end up buying it, I can only hope they don't have to endure what we did. Me and my hubby George were lucky to have a cozy little house right next to a quiet lake. We bought this place just a few months ago and were visiting for the second time. It was hidden by trees, and to get there you had to travel a long, unpaved road. There were no other houses around for miles, and the lake felt almost like our own private spot, even though it was on public land that we didn't own. The house itself was an old-looking building made of worn wooden planks that gave it a rustic vibe. The inside was still not filled with furniture, with only one couch in the living room. The kitchen had an old-fashioned fridge that worked on propane gas. We didn't use it much. The oven and stove also ran on propane. The house had solar panels on the roof for power, but otherwise there was no electricity. There were big windows in the back that let you see the beautiful landscape and the lake. We really liked the quiet life out there. I had just retired, and George was still working part-time. We planned to spend lots of time at this place, and so far, we were loving every moment of it. But then one day, as we were sitting on the porch sipping our morning coffee, George spotted a stranger in a small boat floating on the water. It was strange because we had never seen anyone else on the lake before. After all, it was a hidden spot, and the lake wasn't connected to any larger body of water. We didn't expect to see anyone out there. We tried to be friendly and waved at the man. He was about 200 feet away, but he didn't react at all and kept staring straight ahead towards our house. We thought it was rude, but we just went on with our day. The next day, we went about our usual stuff. But the strange man was there again. He sat in the same boat, not moving, just off the shore. He kept staring at our house. We felt a little creeped out, but we tried to brush it off, thinking we might be overthinking things. It was hard to understand what was going on. He didn't seem to be fishing or anything. We couldn't figure out why he was there. We also couldn't figure out where this guy was going when night came. We had gotten to know the other people around the area and were pretty sure he didn't have a house close by. When evening came, George and I found ourselves almost unable to look away from the window, feeling drawn to keep an eye on the man. It was nearly completely dark, but the guy was still there, just sitting in his little boat. By this time, George and I were pretty freaked out. We started thinking that he might be sitting there all night long. We stayed up until about midnight. It was completely dark outside, but we couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still out there, watching our house. I was more scared than George, but we both agreed that we needed to go check. George went outside into the night with just a flashlight, his steps making soft sounds on the wooden pier. I stayed back, watching from a distance. When George's flashlight hit the man, his face lit up in a creepy way. The way he was staring at us was really unnerving. I grabbed George's arm when I saw that, and without saying anything, we both went back into the house. Right then, we knew it was time to get out of there. We didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, we packed our things quickly, eager to leave. The man in the boat was still there. When we got back to the city, we had a long chat about what we should do. We called the police, but there was nothing they could really do, since it wasn't illegal for the man to be there. We thought it could maybe be considered stalking or harassment, but that would be hard to prove. In the end, we kept going to our little house, but we bought a gun for safety. It made sense to have one anyway, since there were also bears in the area. That happened over 2 years ago now, and we haven't seen the man again, even though we spend nearly half the year at the house. We asked all our neighbors about the man, but no one knew who he was, and none of them had ever seen anything like that. We still don't know what the whole thing was about or what the man wanted. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, my family embarked on one of our regular trips to visit my uncle, who resided on a charming farm. This particular visit brought me immense joy because my cousin Mary, who was just slightly older than me by 6 months, would also be there. Whenever we were together, mischief seemed to be our constant companion. We were intimately familiar with my uncle's property, from the sprawling woods to the surrounding areas, which we explored extensively. Our adventures typically consisted of leisurely walks or exhilarating rides on my uncle's quad bike. Most of these escapades were fairly ordinary, but one fateful day in the early 90s, something extraordinary unfolded. While I don't recall the exact date, I know it was June because it was summertime. Yet our grand 4th of July festivities were still on the horizon. Mary and I decided to embark on a leisurely stroll along the dusty road that originated from my uncle's abode. Not too far from his place, a small stream meandered its way through the landscape. Whenever heavy rainfall occurred, the stream would swell, often causing the bridge to become impassable. However, on this particular day, the stream lay completely dry. We relished these dry spells as they provided an opportunity for us to hunt for intriguing rocks and ancient arrowheads. On one occasion, we even stumbled upon a partially finished axe head. So there we were, sauntering along the familiar stream bed, engrossed in lively conversation about a myriad of topics, when I noticed something on the bank at eye level. It was enormous. I abruptly halted in my tracks, grasping Mary's hand tightly as I pointed towards the imposing figure before us. To our astonishment, we found ourselves face to face with an immense black bear. Mary instinctively covered her mouth to stifle any potential screams while I swiftly sprang into action, pulling her along with all my might. I was solely focused on getting her to safety, propelled by an adrenaline-fueled surge of determination. I sprinted with unparalleled speed and intensity, my legs carrying me like never before. Only when we were clear of the stream and back on the road did we finally come to a stop, doubled over, gasping for breath. We exchanged glances and, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and nervous energy, erupted into uncontrollable laughter. Laughter seemed to be the only viable release for the intense emotions we had experienced, as the alternative, crying, was simply too daunting to consider. Eventually, we managed to compose ourselves and make our way back home. Eager to share our harrowing encounter, we recounted the bear sighting to our parents. Unfortunately, our words fell on skeptical ears, as they found it challenging to believe such an extraordinary tale from a pair of young children. Despite our tender age, Mary and I had witnessed the bear with undeniable clarity, leaving no room for doubt about what we had seen that eventful day. I am from a tiny place in Alberta, Canada. This all started last summer when I set out for a solo day hike. My pals had suggested a trail to me and I chose to check it out. I had no idea that the hike was going to turn out as it did. I parked my car at the start of the path. It was a day trip, no overnight stay, so I had a small bag packed mostly with water. I had some food and a waterproof coat just in case. I thought if something bad happened, I could return to my car in a few hours. The path seemed less visited. It was bordered by tall trees and dense bushes. It was a great place for a day walk. I tied my shoes, arranged my bag, and began walking. This wasn't the most secluded path I'd ever used, but once I was in, it felt like I was a long way from everything. The sounds from the road disappeared after a 10-minute walk. The air was clean and cool as I walked further into the wild. After a bit of walking, I noticed something unusual. There was something on the path that looked like a rock, but there was something off about it. I stopped over it for a few moments, unsure of what it was. I bent down and picked it up out of curiosity. As I held it up, I realized it wasn't a rock because it was too light. Upon closer look, I realized that what I was holding was a piece of a skull, and I was fairly certain it was human. I know what deer and bear skulls look like, and this was not one of them. I quickly put it down, not wanting to mess up the scene more than I had already. I turned around and hurried back. My hike was over. I had to report what I had found. As soon as I reached my car, I grabbed my phone to see if I had signal. Luckily, I did. I dialed the police and told them everything. I waited in my car until they arrived. When they got there, I showed them where to look. It turned out that the piece was indeed human. It belonged to a hiker who had gone missing the previous year. The hiker was already confirmed dead as other bone fragments had been found scattered around the area by animals, meaning it's unlikely that all the remains will ever be found. This find was a chilling reminder of what can happen in the wild. No one knows how this person died, but no one suspects any foul play.